Alright, hello everybody. In this video we're going to assemble the rear and front uprights on the Superlite chassis, and what we're looking at is the rear upright uh, as it was delivered in my kit, and then basically this bottom steel plate goes on top. I showed this on an earlier video, and then the ball joint goes in this hole. So this is actually the second time that I'm doing this, and I don't want to get into too much of a rambling dialogue here, but the net is, there's about a quarter of an inch. These holes are deeper by a quarter of an inch than the amount of thread that are in the blocks. And what I realized is that it's possible when I put these together the first time, the torque on the screws we're just torquing into the bottom where there's no thread instead of torquing the plate on the upright. And it was more evident when I put the fronts together. So what I did was I got a tap, and then I tapped those holes like another eighth or a quarter of an inch down, and they clamp very well. So I'm doing the same thing to these rear uprights, and that's what we'll cover in this video, putting the top and bottom plates and the toe plate on the uprights. But a couple things. I'm going to assemble this using red Loctite. This is Scotch Weld TL62 red, and this is their heavy duty Loctite. I sort of like it because it's heavy duty, but it's not permanent where it's as hard, it's as difficult as the standard red Loctite to get off. Basically, if you heat the item up to 300 degrees, the glue starts to soften and you can back your bolts out, where you really don't need much heat to get it to that temperature. So I sort of like it for that reason. The other thing is this does a good job of protecting the aluminum from galling. I use their brand of purple for my RC cars, and I've noticed once when I back these bolts out, they come out much cleaner than if I use the standard Loctite, which tends to be pretty crusty. Okay, so anyway, the first thing I'm going to do is use this tap, and I'm just going to make sure that the bolts go down far enough into the upright so that it clamps that plate onto the upright instead of the torque of the bolt just sort of torquing its way into the non-threaded area. Okay, just want to make darn sure that these plates are attached in a solid way. Okay, so I got the tap all the way in, and let's see, it's a 7/16-14 bolt, so that means 14 threads per inch. So if I divide that by 4, it's like 3.5 turns will bring the threads down another quarter inch. So that's what I'm going to do, and then I'll put a bolt in both of these holes, and you can see how much further one hole goes into the upright than the other, and then I'll just do this for all the rest of the holes. Alright, well, you see the end result here. I wound up doing 2 full turns, which is a little more than 1/8 of an inch, and I think that's plenty. Basically, that bolt came down quite a bit, and that plate is a 1/4 inch thick. So between that thin washer and the 1/4 inch thick plate, now I know that this bolt is actually torquing on the plate instead of just torquing itself in the hole. Okay, and once again, I received these parts, raw in a box because my car was crated. If you received the roller, quite possibly all this is taken care of. I don't know for sure, but I figure this is just worth showing. One other thing to note is the tap that I ordered, this is from McMaster-Carr. It's a tap that's very flat on the bottom, so it's specifically made to tap out holes where they're closed on the end. Okay, so if you're going to do this, just be aware that's the tap you have to get. Okay, at this point I have the anti-seize applied to the bottom of the upright where the steel plate is going to rest on the suspension to protect galling. Also, I've applied anti-seize to the washers at the base of the bolt head. The next step is I'll apply the anti-seize on all the bolts, and then we will install the bolts and torque them up. Okay, so here's a quick video on how much Loctite I put on each bolt. I do a little more than the width of the bolt. So this is 7/16 inch, and I apply it on the bottom, and by the time you thread the bolt in, the red Loctite, moves up the bolt and covers all the threads that are in the aluminum upright. If I put Loctite on all the threads, it winds up oozing out, so I think this will work out just fine. Okay, I attached and torqued the bottom plate. That went smoothly. I'm now going to attach the top plate. The top plate is oriented, the mount for the toe basically matches up where the brake caliper goes. And if we take a peek behind here, there's also a bottom toe link. So you just want to make sure you have this oriented the right way. Since these three holes are equally spaced, if you're not paying attention, you could easily apply these in the wrong direction. Okay, so I've got my bolts ready to go with the Loctite and the anti-seize on them, and we'll finish this rear upright up. Okay, well, we have the rear uprights assembled. Basically what I did was I torqued these bolts, the top and the bottom bolts. These were 7/16 inch bolts to 40 foot-pounds lubricated, which is probably about 50 foot-pounds dry, which is about the max you really want to do into aluminum. I'm concerned I would strip those aluminum threads. So that appeared to be a good torque value. The last step in assembling the rear upright is to attach this rear toe link bracket. And basically I had to grind up some custom mil-spec washers so that they would fit in the hole here. And just like I did before, I'll use some anti-seize on the head of the bolt and on the washer, and then I'll use the red Loctite. I'll torque these bolts up, the 5/16 I torque to 22 foot-pounds. Okay, so that'll be the last step for the rear uprights, and then we'll move on to the front uprights. Okay, so the rear uprights are complete. They're all assembled and torqued with red Loctite. I mean, the parts just look great. Can't wait to mount these parts on the chassis. Let's transition over to the front uprights, and these uprights are already assembled with red Loctite and also torqued at 40 foot-pounds for the top and bottom bolts. What the final step actually for the front uprights is to basically install this steering tie rod plate, and it is held on by these 3/8 inch bolts, and this is the standard bolt that comes with the kit, and it basically threads into that bottom plate and it gets red Loctited. Now I noticed one of the other builders, they purchased the Brembo GT brake package, and in that package RCR provides these longer shoulder bolts, and they recommend using a longer bolt and then closing it off with this lock nut. So that's the approach I'm taking. I just like the extra security of having a lock nut on the end of those steering rod brackets or tie rod brackets. So that's what we're going to do. Let's see. This is the bolt. I also had to make a custom mil-spec washer. It didn't exactly fit properly, and I'll use the anti-seize on the shoulder and the washer, and then red Loctite on the screw, and also red Loctite on that bolt. That's a distorted nut lock bolt. So I'll just crank that up, and for this application we're going to use 30 foot-pounds lubricated. So that's what I've been using with all the 3/8 inch bolts for the suspension, and I think that'll do it. Alright, so this is the final segment of this video. As you can see, I mounted the tie rod bracket to the upright, and I do like the fact I have the extra safety of that shear shoulder bolt, and also the nut on the bottom, and it was all Loctited and torqued to 30 pounds. So These are the front uprights. Here's another peek at the rear uprights. They look great. I'm very excited to start mounting the suspension on the car. Okay, so that's a wrap. Thanks for watching and take care.